Taxonomy is the science of classifying living things. This all started with a scientist named Carolus Linnaeus, and he classified organisms based on their physical characteristics. And he classified organisms only into plant and animal kingdoms. And since then, we've added a lot more kingdoms because we've discovered new organisms, microscopic organisms that he didn't know about. And we've also discovered some of the processes going on in these organisms makes them too different to put in the same kingdom. So he classified based on either plant or animal, based on those physical characteristics. He also developed the system of binomial nomenclature, which is an organism's scientific name. It's rooted in Latin, and it comes from the classification system that we still use today. One of the things he looked at as a physical characteristic was symmetry. There are three types of symmetry. Asymmetrical, that prefix a, without, so asymmetrical will be without symmetry. They're irregular in shape. You can't divide them and get equal parts. With bilateral symmetry, the two sides look alike if you divide it in half. That's what humans have. If you divide down the middle, the left and right halves look basically the same. With radial symmetry, the parts radiate from the center. Generally, this is something that's circular shape or can be divided in some way that you can divide it more than just one time to get equal parts, so 2 or more times. The classification system that we use today was started by Linnaeus, and it's been modified since then. For example, our biggest category, domain, was added only recently with the discovery of certain types of bacteria that couldn't go in the same level of classification because they were so different. So the domain is the largest, and each domain is broken down into several kingdoms. Each kingdom broken down into phylums, each phylum broken down into class, into orders, into families, genus, and species, being the smallest level of organization. The smallest level of that classification is the species. Those are all organisms that can reproduce fertile offspring, defines what a species is. The last two levels of this classification system are what's used for the scientific name. That's what's used with the binomial nomenclature. Generally, the genus and species, the genus will be capitalized, the species will be lowercase, and it'll be underlined or in italics. For example, the human scientific name is Homo sapiens. So our genus is Homo, and then our species would be sapiens. The entire level of classification for humans is listed here in green. We are in the domain Eukarya because we have eukaryotic cells. We are in the kingdom Animalia, we're animals. Phylum would be Chordata because we have a backbone. We are in the class Mammalia, we're mammals. We're in the order Primates, the family Hominidae, the genus Homo, and species Sapien. And those are the two we use for the scientific name. There are 3 domains, the largest level of classification. The first is Archaea, which contains only the kingdom Archaeobacteria. And Archaeobacteria are bacteria that are called extremophiles. They live in extreme environments, places where we thought no life could possibly exist. We found these type of bacteria there. And a lot of these are very recent discoveries. The second domain is bacteria. Bacteria contains just the kingdom Eubacteria. Eubacteria are any of the bacteria you've probably ever heard of would fall into this kingdom. Things like E. coli, Salmonella, and your bacterial STDs all fall into the kingdom Eubacteria. The third domain is Eukarya, and that contains all of the other kingdoms. The first 2 domains are all prokaryotes, and then the last domain is just our eukaryotic organisms, so everything else falls into that domain. Those are the 4 kingdoms that fall under eukarya are fungi, things like mushroom, yeast, mold. Protista or protists are unicellular organisms, which you've probably never heard of any of them. Euglena, amoeba, protozoan, things like that. Those are our unicellular eukaryotes. And then Animalia, animals, bird, cat, fish, a ton of others that you could think of. And then plantae would be all your plants, pine tree, grasses, moss, those kinds of things. This picture is a cladogram. Cladograms show relationships between organisms. The closer they are on the cladogram, the more closely related they are. It also indicates what separates them from the other organisms on the cladogram. This is a very simplified version of a cladogram, but it does show all of our examples of these organisms across the top, and then the defining characteristic that separates them from the others is listed at the bottom. So this hash mark right here separates the organisms that do not have jaws and the organisms that do. Everything above that line would have jaws. Hagfish is a jawless fish. So separated there. A perch is another type of fish, so it has jaws, but it doesn't have lungs. The lungs are anything above that hash mark. So everything else on our cladogram has lungs. Claws or nails is another defining characteristic. That's what separates our salamander from everything else. Notice this one is not along the bottom because not everything in this direction has feathers, but everything above the line does, which in this case is just the pigeon. Other types of birds would be found on that line as well. And then the last part, fur or mammary glands, separate the mouse and the chimpanzee, so everything again above that line would have that characteristic, and all of the others. This is a very simplified version of a dichotomous key. Dichotomous keys are used to identify what species an organism belongs to based on their physical characteristics. In this example, we are going to be identifying my lovely stick people that I've drawn for you. So the way that a dichotomous key works can be shown really easily with a simple example, but they can get a lot more complex when you're trying to determine different species of maple trees or something like that, where you're getting into much more detail about that organism. So in this example, we have these people, and we're trying to identify who they are. And so we'll just take a look at this first one. This first individual, we're going to be asked a series of questions about them to follow a pattern to get to what, in this case, his name is. Normally it would lead you to the species name. So the first question is he wearing shorts or pants or wearing a skirt? Of course, he's wearing shorts or pants, so we follow over. It says go to number 2. We're going to skip down to number 2, and it asks us about wearing glasses. If he's wearing glasses, we go to number 3, but he's not, so we have to skip down to number 4. Skip down to number 4, it asks short or no hair or long hair. Of course, he has no hair, so we'll follow this one over. It says go to number 5. Number 5, short hair or no hair. He has no hair, so we follow it over, and we find out that that first individual is Rob. You can use these examples to go through and identify the rest of the individuals here and see if you can follow the steps of the dichotomous key.